day. This is Tami Fratis here with Money Matters TV. We have an exciting show today. I'm co-hosted with Dan White, CEO of Dan White & Associates. Hi, Dan. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Tami. Thanks for having me on the show. Great to see you.
My pleasure. We have a guest that's going to be joining us later who is the CEO of his own company. He's going to give us a little bit of history about that company. But before he comes on, I have to know from Dan. Dan, what is going on with the Federal Reserve? Are they going to cut rates some more?
That seems to be the $1 million question, Tami. I mean, I think it was back in December they did cut rates at the last meeting. I think it was December the 16th. But Chairman Powell kind of hedged a little bit. They were talking about 4 rate cuts this year. The market had kind of already priced them in. And he said, whoa, pump the brakes a little bit. We might not cut 4 times. Inflation is a moving target. It's going back up. We might only cut twice. Well, when that happened, the market dropped like 3% the next day. And I think the NASDAQ dropped like 5%. So the market didn't like that. They want an easy money. They want to see the Fed cut rates. And I think the problem is, the economy's doing good right now. We're getting 3% gross domestic product, and unemployment numbers came in pretty good. So the economy's doing good, and it's like inflation. That the problem is inflation. When you look at inflation, it's starting to go back up. President Trump gets inaugurated in a couple months. Both of his policies, whether it's tariffs, which usually are inflationary, or if he starts sending people out of the country, it may create a labor shortage. And of course, then you got to pay more for workers, and that's inflationary. So I think the Fed wants to cut rates because obviously the debt is sky high, but they're worried about inflation. So it remains to be seen.
So you said a couple months for the inauguration. I think it's a couple days. But
January 20th.
What do you think that's going to do for the markets in 2025? As you mentioned, it did drop when they went from 4 rate cuts to 2 conversation, but it just recently went up again. What do you think is going to happen this year? Is it going to be real up and down, or is it going to be a constant up, or what do you think?
I think we're going to be pretty choppy. I mean, if you look at the markets in general, the valuations, which ultimately do matter, and if you get in when the stock market is very expensive, then your returns are likely to be lower going forward. And we're at the second most expensive stock market in history. So that doesn't bode well for future returns. Now, obviously, if the Fed cuts rates, the market loves that. They love cheap money, and the market can go higher than anybody ever thinks. But I think with the new inauguration coming in, with inflation, with some of the data we see, I think there's going to be some volatility. And let's face it, we're a little overdue for a correction. A correction could be anywhere from 10 to 20%. Hopefully that would be the end of it. But I think if you're near retirement, I think the message is you got to be a little cautious this year.
Well, I know the traders like choppy markets, but for you and me, Dan, we don't like choppy markets. So as you said, it's a good time to maybe take some liquidity out of the market and play it safe.
Yeah, take some risk off the table. So
yeah, I think it's a good time. So, but with the market being so good for now, it's a great time to sell your business.
Yeah, I was going to ask you some questions as well, Tami. I mean, the market is up. We've had 2 back-to-back 20% plus years in the S&P. So people are feeling that wealth effect a little bit. When in your line of work, when is the best time to sell a business?
Well, it's not just market dependent. It's also company dependent. So if you've been having growth, like you mentioned, 10, 15, 20% a year, and your financials are solid, meaning you actually have a bottom line that's not red, like my suit, you want to say, okay, can I keep this growth going like I've seen? Because again, if we do have any kind of pullback or any kind of labor shortage, it's going to impact smaller businesses. So you want to get your financials in order, meaning audited financials, a quality of earnings report. You want to document your business processes so that someone else could buy your business, then they basically are handed cookie cutters of here's how not to screw it up, right? And you want to hire an expert that can help get the best value for your business. And then one thing that most people don't think about is you have to have a second bench tier. So you have to have someone that can step into the shoes of the new CEO and help them along. So make sure you have a solid, second tier management, not just the key C-suite people.
Yeah, I think that's kind of, you run into that a lot, especially with small businesses. You get the founder or the owner, and he's put his blood, sweat, and tears, and decades of his life into the business, and it's been great. It's been very successful. But the vendors and the customers and all, they're used to dealing with the guy.
Yes.
So now the guy wants to get out, and wants to move on to the beach or whatever he wants to do. And, a lot of the success of the business is tied up in the owner. So how do you make a business more favorable to sell when so much of it is tied up with one person?
Sure. So the best thing to do is actually to hire, either through an internal promotion or externally, someone who is younger, someone who knows the industry. Obviously, they're not going to know everything the owner knows, but someone who you can groom for 6 months, a year, take them around to all the vendors. Have, boat outings or golf outings or lunches with your key suppliers, with your key customers. There's always, 20% of the client base is usually 80% of the revenue. That's pretty standard. So
Right.
Those top 20 customers, make sure they've been introduced to your head of operations or your new person that you've hired to be head of sales or a financial person. You could hire a CFO if you never had a CFO, and they could be the person that's managing, quote unquote, the relationships. So it doesn't have to be the CEO anymore with all the contacts and all the relationships. Spread it around the organization.
Yeah.
Make sure there's more than you who actually caters to those clients, caters to those good suppliers. And, I always like to send end of year gifts, small gifts to the best customers or the best suppliers. So we have a question from Albert Barton of Boston. Dan, this is right up your alley. What do you think about small cap stock mutual funds for 2025? Dan, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I do. I mean, that's kind of an interesting question, and it kind of goes back to what I talked about earlier with inflation and what the Fed's going to do. Small cap mutual funds are investing in smaller companies, and smaller companies generally require more cash because they're in a growth mode. Small cap is growing, so they need capital. And I think, going back to our inflation talk, if the Fed says, hey, inflation's under control, we are going to have 4 rate cuts next year, I think that would be fantastic for small cap stock mutual funds. If, on the other hand, the inflation numbers start running hot and the Fed says, hey, we're not only not going to cut rates, but we have to raise rates this year, I don't think that would bode well for the small caps, and I think they could take a hit. So I think if you're going to look at small cap stock mutual funds this year, you really got to be watching the Fed and what they're going to do with interest rates.
Okay, great answer for Albert Barton in Boston. If you're interested in sending in a question, here's how to do it.
You can have your questions answered on Money Matters. Please go to our website, money-matterstv.com. On our homepage, click on the banner on the right that says, Send us your questions. While you're on our website, you can find information about our host and guests, as well as show notes and links about this show and past shows. Money Matters is also available as a podcast on iTunes and Stitcher, so you can listen to Money Matters while you're on the go. That website address, again, is money, MONEY, -matters, MATTERS, TV.com.
That was great. And we have a guest today, Jason Lazarus, who is the CEO of Synergy Settlement Services. Welcome to the show, Jason. Glad to have you.
Thanks, Tami. Pleasure to be here.
So you're both a CEO and a lawyer. Most lawyers join big law firms, and I would say toil away. But if you love law, you're not toiling. But you have your own firm. How did that come about? When did you think that you wanted to go out on your own and be an entrepreneur?
Well, actually, I did start out practicing doing insurance defense work here in Orlando, Florida, where I'm based, and had an entrepreneurial spirit because both my parents were entrepreneurs, had started a business here in Orlando. And so decided that I didn't want to be a litigator for the rest of my life. And as you said, toil away. And got into settlement services, helping people that have been injured. And that slowly turned into starting my own company eventually. Had worked for other companies, but had this desire to do something different and start something that was really a new concept in our industry.
Mm-hmm. And you yourself has had a personal injury, so to speak, correct?
Yeah. Back in 2016, I'm an avid cyclist and was out for a training ride and got struck by a car while cycling and wound up in the ICU for 9 days and 21 days in the hospital. So, yep, learned it the hard way.
So how did that change how you approach the whole field of personal injury and helping people who have had terrible accidents and maybe their whole life has been turned upside down?
Well, I always had tremendous, awe for what people could withstand and go through, having seen that in my career. But, it's the old saying, until you walk a mile in someone else's shoes, you really don't understand it completely. So I think for me, it really gave me insights into all of the things that people experience after they've been injured. Waking up in the ICU with tubes down my throat, not being able to speak, and being visited in my hospital room by a lawyer who was a friend, who ultimately was hired to be my personal injury lawyer to handle my case, to, going through trying to recover physically, emotionally, mentally, get over what transpired. I'm lucky because I had a team here at Synergy that continued to make the business work while I could recover. Most people don't have that luxury, wind up losing their jobs. But thankfully, I was not in that situation. But then I had to navigate all of the things that people that have been injured navigate once there's personal injury litigation going on, including, ultimately needing to seek some counseling for the trauma that I experienced and trying to deal with those things. It's a very difficult thing to have happen to you, especially when you're someone that's always felt like you had some control over what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Hey, Jason, it's Dan. Hats off. I mean, thank God there's people like you who advocate for people who have been injured. I think it's got to be incredibly rewarding to help people out that way. But in your career, you've probably seen a very broad range of cases. What do you believe are the biggest challenges that injured folks face, especially when it comes to, going through the whole legal process, navigating the settlement and their long-term needs? Because a lot of these injured people, it's not like something they're going to recover from in a short period of time.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Dan. Great question. The biggest challenge typically is people lose their job and they wind up without insurance and they wind up on government assistance programs. And those are very complicated. And, ultimately there's some really important planning that has to be done for someone that's particularly catastrophically injured or just permanently disabled, to make sure that they can keep those government benefits in place, because 9 times out of 10, a personal injury settlement is going to be insufficient to fully compensate that person for all of the future medical damages they may need. So they turn to that government assistance to provide those things, and also financial support in the case of Social Security. The biggest challenge is people typically don't even understand what benefits they're getting. They confuse Medicaid with Medicare. They don't understand the different Social Security benefits For example, there's SSI, which is supplemental security income, which is needs-based, versus Social Security disability income, which is, an entitlement that if you paid enough quarters into the system, you get fully insured by working. Just navigating just those things are incredibly difficult without experts, people like me, people like the trial attorneys who understand these issues as well, to make sure that ultimately that client gets the planning done and protection they need to live the rest of their life with dignity and having a framework that takes care of them put into place.
And you wrote a couple books, one on the art of settlement and one on in litigation to life. Do both your books talk about the process that a typical client of yours goes through, or are they written more from the perspective of helping other attorneys be better at their job and helping people who have been injured?
So Art of Settlement, my first book, I wrote for trial lawyers to understand the issues that I was just talking about and a lot of other complicated issues that arise at settlement. So that is a guide for trial lawyers, primarily for them to issue, spot, and understand when they're representing clients in their practices, what issues to be cognizant of and concerned about, and bring in experts to make sure that ultimately those issues are addressed for the client. Litigation of Life was something, my second book, I wrote for injured people in particular to understand everything that's part of the settlement process. Because, trial lawyers are great at explaining things to them throughout the litigation process, sometimes in the rush to settlement, because oftentimes these things come about through a mediation, which in one day the case just simply is over. The client may not have a full education understanding of the impact of what that settlement means to them. And, the decisions that they make that day can have long-standing impact. For example, someone could put into place a structured settlement, which is an annuity that can be used as part of a personal injury settlement to make future periodic payments. Well, if they're on Medicaid, that income stream could be disqualifying and cause a problem for the rest of their lives. So understanding the importance of the decisions that are made on that day of settlement, that's what this book talks about. So before settling a case, it is a good read for someone that's been injured and wants to really understand these issues in layman's terms. The Art of Settlement is written more legalese. Litigation of Life, hopefully people that have been injured will find it easier to read. And I wrote it from my perspective of kind of what I went through, because, having been through the entirety of the process, my case settled at mediation, didn't go to trial. I could give that perspective for them to understand it in the context of going through that whole process.
Great.
Hey, Jason, yeah, in listening to you talk, it brings up a couple other questions, because our careers kind of intersect a little bit. We help people with Social Security from a retirement standpoint, when's the best way to claim and all. And in fact, I just had a client in here, 8 children, 4 minors, and dad is going to be 62 here in a year. So do I claim and then get the kids of the 8 children, 2 have Down syndrome and 1 has cerebral palsy. So I'm curious, you deal with personal injury and getting them all the government benefits. Do you then also help them with like the special needs trust and everything, that the documents in place so that they can continue to receive those benefits?
So in addition to Synergy, I do have a law practice here in Florida where I help clients that are injured, and my niche is that personal injury space. So you do have people that are disabled, like you've described, which I know what the planning is, but my niche is working with those that have been injured, setting up those special needs trusts for people that are on needs-based government assistance, which is Medicaid and SSI. And I've got an LLM in elder law, which is that kind of elderly disabled population, the type of planning that needs to be done for those folks. And always had an interest in that area because it was just a natural adjunct with the people that I was working with. Most of them were in that situation. So I wanted to be able to give them that holistic expert that could deal with all those issues that arise when someone's catastrophically injured.
So do you also then have elder care abuse cases where maybe somebody who is somewhat disabled, but not necessarily due to an injury, just due to the natural aging process, who is being taken advantage of and needs an advocate to help them?
Not in my practice. I mean, there are cases where we assist where it's someone that was in a nursing home who's been, there's a nursing home negligence case because of neglect or mistreatment or miscare. And then typically those people do need special needs trust because frequently Medicaid is the payer because Medicare does not pay for nursing home care except for a short duration post-hospital stay. So for many clients who are elderly who have been injured in a nursing home, they then need a special needs trust. Although for those, it's a pooled special needs trust, which is a special type of special needs trust for those over the age of 65.
So talk a little bit, if you could, Jason. Synergy has become a leader in healthcare lien resolution. Can you explain how Synergy helps law firms and their clients by streamlining this process and why it's such an important part of the settlement process?
Well, so for most people that have been injured, they don't understand that their healthcare insurance, when they've settled their claim, has a lien against the settlement. So let's use my case as an example. My medical bills were in excess of $380,000 when I was in the hospital. When I settled my personal injury case, my health insurance plan had a lien against the settlement that had to be negotiated and resolved. And it's incredibly important because that is a claim that reduces net recovery. So every dollar that goes back to the lien holder means a dollar that's not in the pocket of the injured party that typically they need to take care of themselves. So my company represents the injured parties in that negotiation instead of the law firm doing it, because for law firms, it's very inefficient for them to handle it themselves. They're not really experts in this area for the most part. There are some firms that have people that are on staff that do this day in, day out, but most don't. We hire people from the recovery contractors because there's a big industry, and these are companies with thousands of employees that are hired on behalf of these plans to recover from the injured, particularly ERISA, so employer-based health insurance plans, or for example, Medicaid programs use these contractors to recover as well. So we hire from those companies, and we know the inside baseball and are able to work with those lien holder claims by negotiating with those people, protecting the net recovery for the injured party. And for the law firm, it makes them more efficient because sitting on the phone with Medicare or with an ERISA plan isn't a good use of their time. Their time is better spent helping the next injured party and moving another case towards settlement. So this healthcare lien resolution niche that we operate in is an incredibly important one for the injured party in terms of protecting that net recovery and making sure that every single dollar that should be in the pocket of the injured party is in their pocket when they are done with their case. Because usually the liens are the last thing that gets resolved in a personal injury case.
And how do you see the industry evolving in the next 5 to 10 years, if at all?
Well, AI and technology is certainly impacting every aspect of law. And I do think that there are going to be changes because of those types of tools that are being utilized by both sides. So the technology impact is really the most important thing that I see changing things. And really what that most likely will result in is speeding up of processes, which is a good thing because, if you've been injured, you don't want to wait on the recovery, right? You want to get those dollars in your pocket to help you. And I know, having been through that, how frustrating it is at the end trying to get the dollars dispersed, because that creates a bottleneck at the end, which is why oftentimes we get hired by law firms, because they're at a standstill. They can't get the dollars dispersed to the client until this lien is negotiated and resolved. So this is a critical thing that these processes can be sped up. Although, unfortunately, in law, it is still a little bit antiquated in terms of the adoption of technology, and even outsourcing to a company like ours. I think that is a much slower adoption rate. Although, as younger attorneys come into the practice, they really get this idea of efficiency and streamlining.
So Jason, I want to go back to those liens for just a second. So I guess from a personal injury standpoint, I mean, you've got loss of income, you've got maybe quality of life, and then you've got the medical bills. I'm sure that has to be factored in when you're going into a settlement conference. You're trying to build that into the settlement, the lien, because obviously that's not going to go to your client.
Well, yeah, I mean, the medical damages are an aspect of the total damages that are claimed, right? If it goes to mediation, you're going to quantify those dollars, but they're not inflated in the sense of the lien kind of is what it is. The future medical damages usually are the ones that are what is, a large component of the future damages, particularly for someone that's catastrophically injured. Mm-hmm. And so, all these elements of damages are important aspects of ultimately what that case settles for. And then the lien is really more of an impact on the net proceeds. That's why I was talking about that concept of protecting the net, because that is, what ultimately the client walks away with after fees and costs and after liens.
Jason, thank you so much for that education about the process and how critical your firm is to the negotiation in the liens that the hospitals have and healthcare has on the ultimate settlement that the injured person walks away with. Dan, thank you for co-hosting today. Our next guest is going to be Patrick Gallagher of Voltron Therapeutics. I really hope that you had a good show and you got a lot of insights from Dan and Jason and myself about selling your business. And please tune in for the next Money Matters TV and send your questions to moneymatterstv.com. Thank you very much for your time.